Okay, calling us to order. Let me read the roll off rather than people identifying themselves because everybody's orientation is different. So I'm Rick Smith, Chairman, Dana Oviatt, Art Tanner, Beth Steele, Blake Powell. Those are your 5 elected commissioners. We have Larry Dunn, who's an alternate, and Lynn Marshall, who is another alternate. And then we have several people observing. Okay, there is an official statement that I have to read because we do these meetings remotely by Zoom, so bear with me. This meeting in the Noank Zoning Commission will take place through Zoom remote meeting technology. My name is Rick Smith, Chairman of the Commission. The host of the meeting is Larry Dunn, alternate Zoning Commission member. Anyone speaking should state their names prior to speaking each time. The participants in this meeting will be the commission members and staff. Persons with applications for architectural design review, we have none tonight, and the commission's counsel if he joins. At the discretion of the chairman and with the concurrence of the commission, elected alternate members of the commission may participate during old business during discussion of the short-term rental issue. Participants who would like to comment on an item or share a screen item should indicate by using the raise hand icon at the bottom of the screen or by raising your hand visually in front of the screen. After the raise hand has been detected, the participant will have the opportunity to speak after being called upon by the chairman. Participants should mute their microphones until called upon. Procedurally, to offer a motion or second a motion, commissioners should physically raise their hand and be acknowledged by the chairman. To vote on a motion, commissioners will be called upon by the chair. The public can participate in the meeting as observers and at the start of the meeting during the general comments section of the agenda, at which issues not on the agenda can be raised for future commission consideration. During the general comments section, a member of the public wishing to speak will be asked to raise his or her hand by using the raise hand icon at the bottom of the screen. All participants, including commissioners and staff, must identify themselves before speaking. Members of the public can also submit comments by writing to the commission after the meeting for consideration on any item discussed tonight. Finally, and most importantly, a recording of tonight's meeting will be posted on the Town of Groton's website within 7 days of the meeting. It actually loops to a Facebook record of all the meetings we've had since May. So it's a handy way to refresh your memory on what went on. Okay. We have no public hearing tonight. Would anyone in the public like to comment on any item that is not on the agenda? And this is usually the time when people identify things for us to look at in the future. Mr. McGee. Go ahead. Oh, wait a minute. You just muted again. Okay, you should be good now.
There you go. Sorry. Yep, Ryan McGee. I live at 59 Crosswinds. I was told that by Pawcatuck Roofing that I had to attend as far as getting a new roof. Just to let, I don't know, like they told me this morning.
No, sorry, that's not good information. What you have to do is go see the zoning enforcement officer for a permit. His office hours are between 5:30 and hopefully 7:30. I don't know how close you live to the firehouse in Noank, but if you ran over there now, you might catch him. You don't need to appear for the commission right out of the blocks. You have to get a permit from the ZEO. And he only has office hours 2 hours a week on Tuesday. So.
All right.
Good luck.
All right. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Anybody else like to comment on subjects not on the agenda? Did I see a hand? No. Okay. Okay, then we'll conclude that we don't. let's see. We have no applications for design review tonight, so we'll go to reports before we get to business. Zoning, zoning enforcement officer report is behind the agenda. Well, it's actually, you got at it on the website. Larry's going to scroll down to it. So those of you who have printed out, you can read your own, or you'll see it up on the screen. Okay. All right. I guess I'm supposed to read these, so bear with me. Monthly report for August. I'm going to defer that. I'm not sure that's necessary because I don't read the draft minutes, which we're going to do in a minute. So you've all gotten this last week. If there's a question you have on it, fine, but otherwise, without objection, I'll take it as approved. Is there any objection? Seeing none, we'll consider the zoning enforcement officers approved. Now minutes. The first one is the August 18th regular meeting. Okay. Are there any comments on this, this set of minutes or questions? Okay, seeing none. Are there any comments or questions on the special meeting minutes of September 1st? Okay, seeing no hands. Without objection, we'll call them approved. Is there any objection? Seeing none, both sets of minutes are approved. We have old business and we have new business. If you don't mind, I'd like to take new business first because I don't think it's going to take action tonight. It's more for us to be aware of an issue that we perhaps would like to address in the future. And let me just, as an introduction, this is a letter from Ann Bergendahl, who's a realtor, lives in Noank, and it relates to the FEMA rules and Noank rules on the 50% renovation rule that in Noank is over a 10-year period and in other communities around us is 1 year. So Ann's letter asks, can we consider some other year? In fact, we can. Noank adopted the 10-year period back almost 10 years ago in deference to the FEMA request that they wanted to minimize the number of properties that are subject to flooding, and they get at that by making people either knock down a structure and build a flood compliant one or to raise the structure. Well, as Ann points out, some people don't, it's not worth it to them to do that. So sometimes houses don't sell that could otherwise. Knowing that our surrounding communities all have used 1 year, I asked Bill what he thought about it, and he said, he made the point that I just did about FEMA, but he also said if you go with just 1 year, that is the maximum help to realtors and homeowners. The 10 years, the maximum help to FEMA, and we may be able to find a happy medium in the 4, 5, 6 year range that might satisfy both needs better. What I would propose that we do is not let this get in the way of our principal agenda item, which has been the same for the last couple of years, and try not to divert our attention from short-term rental issues. At some future meeting, we may want to schedule a public workshop where for that part of the regular agenda, we would invite the public to hear essentially what I just heard, then have Bill make the technical case for the FEMA view and the realtor view from his vantage point as a CEO, and then let the public, pro, con, certainly let Ann explain herself further, but let the public comment, then we'd be in a better position to decide if we want to do a text amendment. And that process would be like we just did with solar panels. Difference being I have no way to predict how much time this would absorb, and that's why I'm leery about letting it get in the way of our normal business. So that's kind of a preparation of where we are. So does any of the 4 other commissioners have a point on this that they'd like to offer? Or would you agree that we should keep it on our list of things to do by regular meeting in the future, but not necessarily now or at the next one? That's the 2 ways of looking at it. Anybody? Nip Tanner.
My concern, I think it's a legitimate issue that deserves some attention. And I'm concerned that if the short-term rental regulation development continues at its recent pace, it may be a long time before we get around to this. So I would suggest that we say that if we haven't resolved the short-term rental regulations within X amount of time, that we then insert this into the process. Because if the short-term regulation process, which has already gone on for, I think it's going to be approaching a couple of years and not too long, and it gets delayed by a meeting or 2 because we deal with another issue, I think for me that would be acceptable. So that's point number 1. Point number 2, I was interested in the 2 different points of view that were raised by Anne and Bill. And I don't think, as you indicated, Rick, that it would be inappropriate for us to talk about some sort of a middle ground. In terms of the 10 years, as somebody who almost 21 years ago bought a 150-year-old house, and over the 21 years that I've owned it, have done a variety of upgrades, no one of which was huge, but if the next $10,000 that I wanted to spend on it triggered a 10-year look back that said, oh no, that $10,000, you're going to have to raise the house 4 feet. That would seem to me to be out of proportion to what might be appropriate. So I understand Bill's point of view that we want to have regulations that don't allow people to game the system by doing half of a very large project in 1 year and half in the next year to avoid what would otherwise be a requirement to dramatically improve the resilience, sustainability of the property. So, more than 1 year would seem to make sense, but I think 10 years is excessive. So that's where I'm coming from at this point.
Okay. Anybody else? Blake?
Well, I would agree with Nip's, Rick's last point and Nip's recommendation to, put this on a meeting agenda and get some public input on it where we can do a little research and make ourselves a little smarter on the whole topic, but don't just defer it until we're done dealing with short-term rentals.
Okay. Do either of you have I know you sort of speaking off the cuff right now, but do you have a sense of how long you feel we ought to wait before we should say, okay, we're not getting there, so let's insert this into the agenda?
I don't have a strong preference. I mean, sometime in the next couple of months here.
Okay.
For the regular meeting.
I agree with that. A couple of months.
Okay. All right. Let's do that then.
Give us some time to be able to advertise and let residents know it's a topic that we're going to be discussed, that we'll be discussing at a meeting, and
Yeah. Yeah. All All right, I noticed Ann had been on right at the beginning of the meeting, and I did not notice that she left, and she just came back at the third end of this discussion, so I'm going to recap it very briefly. I described your letter. I described Bill Mulholland's view, which was something between 1 and 10 may be appropriate. I discussed my view that I didn't want it to get in the way of the principal piece of business that we've been dealing with for, as Nip points out, just about 2 years now. So what it looks like we're getting towards, unless we see disagreement, is sometime in the next couple of months, 2-3 months from now, we would schedule the issue for a section of a regular meeting that would be a public workshop, so that you and other people could actually speak on the subject. As Blake said, make us all a little bit smarter on the issue, and then decide if it's appropriate for a text amendment or not, which would be the way we would have to change that 10-year period, which is in our regs. So that's where we are now. Dana or Beth, do you have an opinion on this, or you're good with where Blake and Nip are? Beth?
I think both Nip and Blake made good points, and I agree. We're already at September. Maybe think about putting it on our November meeting.
Okay.
Would be a good idea.
Okay. All right, Dana, you good with that? You good?
Yes.
Yes, okay, thanks. Okay, then we'll do that. We'll look at how the business stacks up. I'm going to try and pick an agenda that we've been sort of fortunate. We haven't had a lot of design review applications, which can tend to take a whole meeting. If we find one coming up and have enough time for the notification, that would be my view of the way to do it. So, all right, so we'll do that with that item. So that's the item of new business, which now brings us to old business, which is the short-term rental discussion that we've been involved in, as pointed out, for 2 years now. The supporting documents, which have been on the website for people to look at, that OneDrive, there were 3. There were definitions, which are in front of you on the screen. There was the large matrix that we built over the summer, and there was the attempt to try and consolidate things as much as possible into one rule for everyone type of approach. I entertain some view on how to proceed. My preference would be to go with the last page of this whole thing, which is the one column, one view for everybody. That's kind of consistent with the way the votes seem to be going at the last meeting. But before just jumping into it, I want to see if members, and in this case alternates, because they've been invited in as participants on the short-term rental issue. So views on that, or would you like to proceed based on that one pager? Lynn?
Well, I think I would like to wrap up where we were going at the last meeting first, and because that was left dangling. Dana has suggested we talk about what general approach that we would use, and then what would be the frequency.
Yeah, let me short stop you, Lynn.
We almost got there.
I introduced that badly. You're absolutely right, though. We left ourselves looking at definitions of owner and limits for hosted short-term rentals. Those were the 2. Actually, there were 3. You had asked about what about houses in commercial zones. So
Yeah, I forgot about that.
but those, if we move to that one pager, those are the top 2, the definition of owner and the limits for hosted short-term rentals. So that's consistent with what you just said.
I'm not sure, does definition of owner matter? Because I guess it does of owner. We didn't care whether they were out of state or not. That was whether they were, if it was their principal residence or not. So that got wiped out. I think.
Yeah, it actually, the layers were, was legal resident going to be involved or not?
Or not.
That's why when I flagged everything here, I highlighted those. There are others. Larry, if you scroll further, there are other definitions, which you're right, Lynn, have sort of been subordinated by the vote from last meeting.
Yeah, that's what I think. Let's get the framework and work with the definitions as we need them. But if they're definitions that we're not going to be referring to in the regulations, let's not spend time discussing those.
Exactly. Go back up, Larry, please, to number 6. I'm sorry, 4. You have 2 that are kind of related here. 4, which is one way of defining owner, and then there's 6, which is the hosted, and down in 7 is the non-hosted, which simply depends on that definition of number 4. So they are kind of intertwined. I'd look for your input on the combination of them. Is definition 6 the way you want to proceed, which implies number 4, or number 4 with some revision?
You're talking to me. I didn't quite follow all
No,
that.
anyone,
Oh, okay.
not just you. I mean, it seems to me these definitions are a starting point. If you agree with one of them, that's great. If you want to revise it, that's something to be concerned. That's why I sent it out as the privileged draft, so you'd have a chance to look them over and decide if you like the words or you had some adjustments that you'd like to make.
But at this point, we haven't decided to treat hosted and non-hosted rentals separately. That's what's kind of hanging.
Well, yes and no. We passed a motion, we passed a motion at the last meeting that said we would
Yes.
have limits on non-hosted rentals of 1 per 2-week period. We did not say anything about hosted rentals, and in fact, that was one of the things we left to be discussed tonight.
That's the loose end. So until we know what that is, it could end up being the same thing as
It
hosted by the
could.
time we through. So
Depends on what the pleasure of the group is.
just for expediency, it seems as though that would be the next decision before we worry about defining things too much.
Larry, I need some technical help here. When I put everybody across the top of this screen, how do I see everybody scrolling? Oh, I see. Okay, I got it now. All right. Okay.
Use a little grid box, then everyone will pop up.
Yeah, I can't make mine get back to. All right. Okay, I'm just going to have to superimpose it over the text and then move it when I need to. Okay. Okay, 2 ways of looking at it. You can talk about what kind of limits you want for non-hosted rentals first, and if you end up with the same limit, then the distinction is less relevant. Is that the way you'd like to proceed? 5 commissioners, or all 7? Well, as I did last meeting, nature abhors a vacuum. So I'll offer a motion that we apply the 1 rental per 2-week period limit that we passed at the last meeting for non-hosted rentals, apply that same limit to the hosted rentals. Is there a second to that?
I'm good with that.
Okay. So 1 rental per 2-week period. Hosted. Okay, discussion on the motion. Okay, seeing none.
Yeah.
Who? Len? Yep.
Yeah, yeah, I would just say if we're trying to go for simplicity, that certainly simplifies it a lot. And again, it depends on what else you have in the regulations. Someone, and Beth, was it you, had suggested that the contact, so let's say that, so that it's a non-hosted rental, but that there's a requirement that that the contact be within the fire, say something like they be within the fire district and available within half an hour or something like that. I mean, I can't see a big difference between that and a hosted, because the host is not always going to be right there. So,
Well, this motion has nothing to do with the agent.
right, but I'm saying perhaps it shouldn't be, if you consider that there are strict requirements for the agent, there may not be much difference. So there are more parameters here, but assuming that it would be a strict definition of that, it would make sense to combine it, I think.
Okay. Others? Blake?
Yeah, I would just say, so I'm in favor of them being the same for both categories. The exact limitation on how many weeks per 2-week period or whatever it is, I'm open to. But I wasn't here at the last meeting when you set that limitation for the hosted one. So I'm fine with that. But my primary point really is I would like to see them the same.
Right. Okay. Other comments? All right, this motion would be 1 rental per 2-week period for hosted non-rentals, and the effect of it is that it was the same as the motion we passed for non-hosted. So all those in favor, 5 commissioners, raise your hands. I'm missing somebody. Raise them again, please. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, 4. All those opposed? 1. Okay, 4 to 1. So the motion passes. All right. So for now, we still need to look at that last page of that document, Larry. That one, the top, right there. Now, I had been an advocate for the owner's agent, if he was next door, for both of these being, well, certainly for hosted, to make that allowance, to make it more liberal. I've rethought that. I think, the way this is shaking out, I hear the discussion of the commission being, it should be the owner who is there and not necessarily in proximity, but a hosted rental, the owner is there, and a non-hosted rental, the owner is not there. So in that wording, I would suggest we change that. We don't have to change it now. We can't. This is a PDF file, but my view would be it should be the owner must be present during all rentals under hosted rental. And under non-hosted, it would say the owner is not present during rentals. Is there objection to that? I see none, so
Well, I have a question.
yeah.
What difference does it make if the rental periods, didn't we just say that was the same for each?
No, this is kind of a different issue. The rental period is the same, but in definitions, it's a question of what constitutes a hosted rental. The most liberal way of looking at it under the existing language is the owner or the owner's agent could live in the property or next door to the property, and that would still count as a hosted rental. And under non-hosted, the owner or the owner's agent was not present or in proximity. And what I'm suggesting is we should just change that to be the owner in both cases. You still have the issue of, with a non-hosted rental, you're still going to have an agent, that whole discussion of the secondary contact. But for now, these definitions, I'm trying to streamline it. But I'm fishing for your views to make sure that this suggestion isn't contrary to what you want to have it say.
Well, the way I see your sheet here is they're both the same now. So why do we even need a distinction between the two? And as far as the secondary contact, whether it's hosted or owner on site, or I mean, you should have that no matter what, regardless. So I don't see what difference it is whether we're labeling something a hosted rental or a non-hosted rental anymore.
Okay. Okay. All right. So then we can leave that. All right. Does everybody agree with that? Just ignore it for now. Beth?
I don't disagree with what Blake's saying, but the other point I would make is the language in here that says or in proximity. I don't know, nowhere in the other definition section do we define what proximity is. And I would take that language out because I think it would be addressed probably in another section, or either that or we've got to define it, because proximity could be next door or proximity could be, the other end of town.
In the big matrix, I had more words. You always lose words when you try and do things this way. And in the draft decision document back in the spring, I had a lot more words, so it was much clearer. I had defined in proximity as being a next door neighbor, a backyard neighbor, in other words, contiguous properties, or across the street. Just trying to broaden the opportunity for people in a non-hosted rental to have some way of still doing the rental. But the last time I had discussed that, it didn't seem to resonate. So I'm bringing it to your attention again, trying to cut words out that aren't going to matter.
But if we are allowing non-hosted rentals, and we're going to impose upon a non-hosted rental that there be an agent in the district or in the specific area of the district where the house is located, then I'm not sure why we would need that language. I think that language, it concerns me that it just it opens the door to some vagueness and multiple interpretations.
Larry, down.
I agree with Beth. If you have them both the same definition, then on this one page, you would then need to insert the agent responsibility, which would include the proximity requirement, which would then require a definition of what that means. So I think I would be okay if you made them the same, but then add a line item that gets into the role of an agent which would apply to the non-hosted rental.
See the third row below in the single column. See where it says responsibility for behavior of renters? That's that section about what the response time is.
So that replaces proximity with a time.
No, they're two different things. My intent with the proximity was, as I just described, to provide more latitude, to provide more latitude for people to be able to rent even if they weren't present. I got the sense the last time we talked about this that it did not resonate with people, and that's why I'm suggesting maybe we just take it out here. I didn't actually think this was going to take a lot of discussion unless people's views have changed on it. Let's leave it the way it is for now, because it's complicated, and perhaps I can write something up for the future that'll make more sense, or make more sense to take it out or to leave it in. Any disagreement with that? Leave it for now? Okay. All right, we'll do that. All right, the next one I would suggest Nip?
I'm about to sign off. You may want to appoint an alternate to take my place.
Okay. Lynn is next up on the roster. Larry was last time.
I didn't.
Right? Okay, yeah. Let's see, so Lynn is now seated for Nip Tanner. All right, Larry, you had your hand up on the issue?
Well, part of it you answered, but given what we said earlier in the meeting, the rental period should be the same, one rental per 2 weeks. So I assume that's what you meant.
Yeah,
be
the rental
adjusted.
period I will adjust in the
Okay.
next one I send out.
And I understand the complaint within the X minutes, but it doesn't adjust the proximity. So if you took the proximity out, then I would still think you'd need to address it someplace. If you left it in for a future date, then that'd be fine.
Yeah. Well, frankly, if no one else advocates for the proximity thing the way I've described it, I'm not going to at this point. So that's why I'm suggesting we take that language out of there. If somebody thinks it's a good idea to have it in there, then that's where we should debate it. So I would, my last suggestion was just let's leave it now. It's complicating, or it's confusing us. I see a lot of pensive looks on your faces. So I would leave it. And Beth Steele.
Oh, you're muted.
Wait a minute, Beth. Hang on. I unmuted you at the same time you unmuted yourself, and that muted you. Sorry. Go ahead.
She's muted.
She did.
Wait a minute, Beth.
Time out.
All right. This is not responding to my command, Larry. You're going to have to do it.
Let me try.
There. You have the floor, Beth,
Okay.
and the audio.
I don't really think it's that confusing. I mean, I think we take it out and then it gets addressed in another part of the ordinance where we're talking about the fact that if the owner is not on site, then there has to be someone who is within a certain, in a certain proximity, meaning, for example, if you're renting in the village, you have to be in the village and be able to get there in a certain time. I think that they could both be, consumed by, and I don't have my glasses on, so I can't see everything very well, but there was a section in here whereby you did talk about, with responsibility for behavior of renters. I mean, you could put that into that section. I mean, I hate to kind of kick the can down the road every time we try to whittle it down.
Mm-hmm.
So why leave it? Let's just pare it down now, and then that way we're one step closer.
Okay, so how does this sound? Put proximity issue in the responsibility for behavior of renters. How's that sound?
Yeah, that sounds fine.
All right, I will draft that up. Okay, and I'll just, so you know, I'll keep using this staff draft approach that we've been using, so you get a chance to see what I write and tell me, no, you didn't capture that right before we get to the next meeting.
Yeah, and I see Lynn has her hand up, and before you go to her, I just want to be clear. I'm not saying that there shouldn't be someone, if the owner is not on site, who's in proximity. I just don't think that it should be in that particular definition. I think it needs to be in another section. Otherwise, you open yourself up to a lot of vagueness and multiple interpretations of what that means, and we don't want that.
Okay, good point. All right, thank you. Lynn,
Yeah, I agree with Beth, that the proximity needs to be taken out here. And I would suggest that the other section be in the definition or some description about the requirements for the owner's agent.
I'm sorry, say that again?
I would put the other section, the section I would add that into would be the requirements for the owner's agent.
That's the one we're talking about, right? Responsibility behavior of renters. The third line down in the single column.
Yeah, it's just, I was just going to say it was a definition of owner's agent, but if this is the way you're.
Well, I'm open to all suggestions.
That's all right. That's all right.
All right, we'll do it there then. Okay.
Yeah, fine. Go on.
Okay. All right, that's, we decided not to deal with definition of owner. We did limits for hosted short-term rentals. We dealt with that definition. All right, the next one I would suggest we talk about is the moratorium on STRs. That's one that we had agreed was a good idea on the big matrix, but we did not agree on the years. We were looking at either 3, 4, or 5 years for that period, and that moratorium is after the date of enactment of an ordinance. Any house purchased after that date could not be used for short-term rentals for the period of the moratorium, 3, 4, or 5 years. So what's your pleasure on that? Am I missing somebody? Or Dana or Blake, were you waving your hands? I had you sidelined there. No? Beth had her hand up. Okay, Beth. Wait a minute, Beth. Okay.
I had previously suggested 3, and I'm just for the sake of argument, I'll stick with that. I think that 3 would serve the purpose of what we're trying to accomplish with the moratorium.
Okay. Any disagreement with that? Seeing none, we'll call that 3 years. It's general consensus. We don't need a motion. So 3 years. All right. The next one I would suggest we talk about is number of permits per person. And this is really property permits. And any objection to talking about that one next? I don't want to bulldoze through and tell you what I think we ought to talk about. So I'm continually looking for feedback. That's one that requires a little bit of discussion and cogitating. It's not as clear cut as some of the others. So no objection to talking about that. All right. Lynn, did you want to?
No, I just didn't know what was a person. Exactly.
Yeah, I'm going to start to describe it. Okay. My problem is I can't see everybody's face here without, and also see the document. So that's a problem for me. I'm not sure why. All right, this issue is for the situation where a person may already own, let's say a person owns 4 houses. And we've talked a lot about there should only be one short-term rental house per owner. Yeah. The issue in my mind is, what about somebody who already owns more than one and is renting them? I would think there ought to be a mechanism to allow that person to continue what he was doing, but not let the problem get any worse. Which is why I'm saying the number owned prior to enactment, if used for short-term rentals as a proven non-conforming use, would be allowed. So the person with 4 houses and an ability to prove the non-conforming use for each one of them would be allowed to have those 4 as short-term rentals, but not get any more. I just realized this is a holdover from the summer, and it's inconsistent with the motion we passed a minute ago, because that says the owner has to be must be present during all. No, actually it doesn't. You're right. Okay. So that's the issue then, as convoluted as I made it. What do you do if Lynn owns 3 houses and now is using them for short-term rentals? Should we have a mechanism that allows her to continue after the date of the ordinance passes? Or should we say you have to sell 2 houses or not run them as short-term rentals? That's the issue. Lynn first, and then Blake.
A non-conforming short-term rental is one that was being done before 1955. And if there are any of those, I think that they definitely need to be allowed to continue as such. The others that have been done since then are actual illegal uses. So I don't feel that we need to, I don't know if there are such things, but I don't feel any compunction to have to try to accommodate those.
Are you sure of the non-conforming date?
Isn't that when the zoning regulations came into effect?
It is, but I'm not sure that is the definition of non-conforming use that would apply. I thought it was, once we adopt an ordinance that regulates short-term renting, anything done before then, if it can make the proof test, would be considered a non-conforming use. If I'm wrong on that, then it changes my whole.
Yeah, that's not what I understand. I thought it was an illegal use, not a non-conforming use.
Well, we're going to have to get some legal advice on that. So that's another one we've got to kick that can. Is pre-1956.
Or 55, when was?
Well, that's irrelevant. Whatever the
Right,
date.
whatever it is, yeah.
That was not my understanding of it, but you've got
Okay.
enough doubt in my mind that we're going to have to look into it.
Okay, good.
All right. Who's for talking about parking then?
Can we just,
Oh, I'm sorry, Blake, you did have your hand up on that one.
I just have a question. I'm still unclear on what we're even trying to achieve with that number of permits per person.
Okay, let me see if I can be more coherent this time in describing it. Assume a person owns 3 houses and he's using them today for short-term renting. And we adopt a rule that says each owner can only have 1 house used as a short-term rental. That person then is stuck with 2 houses that he's been renting that he either has to.
You know that I'm saying, why are we suggesting that we're going to impose a limit on how many houses they can do?
I thought everyone in the summer, the last time we talked about this, thought it should be one property permit per house, per owner, per person.
So what would prevent someone from putting 1 house in a wife's name, 1 house in their name, 1 house in an LLC?
The definition of owner, which is why we will have to get back to that. That would include siblings and parents and LLCs. That is not an inconsequential issue, what you call an owner. It's not a person. The question is, do we want an owner to only be allowed to do one short-term rental? The discussion in the summer was, yes, one per person, one per owner. And I'm simply saying, what do you do about the person who's already got more than one? Do you just tell him tough, or do you create a workaround where he's allowed to do what he had done in the past, but not anymore in the future?
Doesn't matter, because if you tell them tough, then you just go put it in an LLC. There's complete workaround.
Not if the definition covers all the reasonable ways for an owner to broaden his perspective. You know, some of the other towns have, you know, they put a house in the son's name and a house in the daughter's name and a house in the wife's name. And the definition of ownership, I think it, if I'm mistaken, one of you had given us a fairly lengthy definition, which we've never really wrestled with. Intent being one per owner. And if we're going to adopt a regulation to do that, we have to make it tight enough that people won't find ways to beat it. And I'm just suggesting, you know, the definition of owner is part of that, but the other part is, do we really want to tell somebody who owns 3 short-term rental houses that they can't do it with 2 of them? Yeah.
I just have a question on that issue. Are we talking about 3 separate lots, or are we talking about a house that has 3 houses on the same lot? Or are you making no distinction whatsoever in this hypothesis?
Mhm.
I'm talking about 3 properties that could be used as short-term rental.
On the same lot or separate lots?
So it could be separate lots. I'm just,
Well, I mean, because in my mind, there's a distinction, because I've made no secret. I mean, where I'm coming from with this is, the only reason I think we should allow it is to allow somebody to stay in their home. And if you've got 3 separate houses on 3 separate lots, then why should you be given 3 separate short-term rental permits? You're doing this to try to stay in your home. It's not a business in the sense that you're trying to earn income. You're trying to offset expenses so you can remain in your home. Now that situation may be different, whereby you've got 3, I mean, there are a few of them in the village where there's multiple houses on a single lot. And that may, in my mind, there's a difference there.
Right.
So to me, in order to make a decision on that, I kind of need to know what we're talking about. But so if we're talking about separate lots, my feeling is it should just be, if you have 3 lots, you get 1 permit and that's it.
okay, others? Okay, looking for hands. Larry?
I'm kind of aligned with Blake that says the legal interpretation of a person by law, I believe, can be a corporation. So we can't redefine, which I think is already a legal precedent for that. So you have to then cover that, because it's a business, which is what Beth said. If there's businesses, then they got to cover it with the other limitations of nights per year and some other things that doesn't make it attractive to say, you know, I'm in this for a business versus trying to retain my home. So I kind of agree with the intent, but I don't think you can limit it the way you think you can.
Okay, what if that's a number of permits per owner? Because that's really what the intention was. I mean, when I drafted all of this, I didn't give as much thought to the exact words. I tried to get the concept down so we could debate it. If it said number of permits per person and per owner, and owner was defined somewhat like we had it on that first page we looked at, that would change the whole nature of what you just said. And I honestly don't care which way. I'm trying to anticipate pitfalls that I know are going to come up, because I know of 1 or 2 people one for sure, another possibly, that owns more houses in Noank and is doing short-term rentals with it. So the issue is going to confront us now in planning or later in, you know, everything from complaints to litigation. What's our rational basis for telling somebody who's renting 3 houses, separate lot houses, short-term rentals now, that you have to stop with 2 of them or sell them or something? If we have a good argument for that and that's what you want to do, fine with me. But I'm trying to anticipate the problems and address them before they balloon on us. Lynn?
They are running those as illegal activities. In our regulations, we require permits if people are renting certain rooms. That comes under the that rooming house. We require, if somebody has a home-based occupation, that they get a permit for that. So someone who's using that as a short-term, long-term rentals are allowed. But someone who's renting a short-term rental, that's not a permitted use in a residential zone. So it's not legal. So, and there are good reasons for it in terms of preserving our neighborhoods. So and in having rental properties available for people who can't afford to buy the house here. So I think it's absolutely justifiable. And to Larry's comment,
What's justifiable? That's a little too vague.
what?
What is, you said, I think it's absolutely justifiable, but I'm not sure what it means.
When you talk, it's justifiable to say that people who already have 3 houses and 2 of them they're using as short-term rentals, that's an illegal use and we don't have to permit it. And in terms of our goals of short-term rentals, they don't follow under that. This is to help people stay in their homes, as Beth said. So that does not have to be a permitted use. And in terms of qualified permit holders, yes, you can exclude business entities such as LLCs. Other communities have done that and they have the language to do so.
Okay.
You can say that only one, it's easier if you require that it be that it be their primary residence. That makes it easier. So it's more difficult if you don't have that in there, but that would have to be explored with the attorney.
Okay, others? Okay, I hear 1 leave it in, 1 take it out, if I can interpret Lynn's comment accurately. And actually, Beth, you were kind of saying if it's separate lots, you'd take it out, right?
If it's separate lots, it's
Yeah.
1 permit if an owner owns multiple lots, you still get 1 permit. It's 1 permit per owner. So if I'm an owner, but my lot has 3 houses on it, to me, that's a different story because that's the entire homestead all on 1 lot.
Okay.
And if it's the entire homestead, it's just renting. It's saying with some of these other specifications, if you have 3 on a lot and you get a permit, it means you can rent 1 of them at a time. But as far as I could tell, you could rent any of the 3 at any one time. Is that the way you see it, Beth? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
I agree.
Larry, Dana, Blake?
I just don't think it's quite that simple. So what we do in the case of somebody who owns a primary resident and then they own half of a property with somebody else, would they be allowed 2 permits, 1 permit? Then they go buy a 3rd house and they own a 1/3 of that one. Is that 3 now? I'm just saying it's not that simple and there are ways around all this.
Well, we should be thinking about ways that we can make sure people don't get around it. Otherwise, we shouldn't do it. But that means people could have as many houses as they want. And that was not the sense I got from the summer when we were trying to construct these things, and I was trying to capture what people had said. So be thinking of good reasons.
To Blake's point, if I own a house with two other people and I already have a permit, unless one of those other two individuals doesn't have a permit on another house, then yes, the house should get a permit because one of those other individuals doesn't have any outstanding. But if I own a house with two other individuals and we all have permits on some other house, then this house should not get the permit. That's my estimation. Again, I'm looking at it from what the purpose, as I see it, of the ordinance should be. And just giving out the permits because I own 5 properties and I want to make money on 4 of them, that's really not the purpose or of what we're trying to do.
Yeah. Okay. Larry? Wait a minute, you're muted. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, all right. So I think we're kind of in agreement with that. I think the issue is more of, can we carefully craft the language so that these escape hatches don't occur? And we can't do that. We need attorney support to do that. So so we could discuss it all we want, and it's not going to make any difference. But if you get the intent down, with that said, then we need an attorney to craft it so that the issues that Blake rose, and I think I did earlier, then that's the way to protect it. But we're not going to be able to do that. That's my only point.
So is the question then, do we want to allow a person who owns multiple houses continue to do it after the date of enactment? Or do we not want them to do it? Dana?
The only offering I can make is we don't want them to do it. It's not in the spirit of the legislation that we're trying to craft, and limiting the number of short-term activity that goes on in Noank so we can preserve the civic community. That's all I got.
Okay.
And I'm not sure I'm following the conversation with respect to Blake's objection. So, and that's all I've got.
Okay. All right. Anybody else? Because I'm Lynn. Lynn.
Just a brief comment. When you say that they either, can you not hear me?
We hear you.
Okay. So just a brief comment. There are more than 2 choices. Have it continue it as a short-term rental or sell it, but they can also use it as a long-term rental. Just a quick comment.
Okay. All right then. Somebody like to make a motion on this, or would you like me to try and see if I can capture your sentiment with a consensus statement? I'd prefer the motion because this one has gotten a little garbled. Well, the simple way, Beth, go ahead.
I'll try. I don't know that I can make a properly worded motion, but my motion would be that there only be one permit provided per owner. I guess that's the motion.
Okay, well, that's clean. Is there a second? Lynn?
Second.
Lynn?
Second.
Marshall is second. Okay, motion is there be one short-term rental permit per owner. Discussion on the motion. Okay, seeing none. Last call. All those in favor, raise your hand. Okay, I see 4 opposed. Okay, motion fails. Fails.
So doesn't the motion pass?
I'm sorry, motion passes.
When I win a motion, I want to get it recognized.
I know, you deserve credit for that.
It
That's right.
doesn't happen often. So.
Okay, fair enough. Motion passes. That language will be changed to be one short-term rental permit per owner. Okay.
My only point is you have to do a lot
Wait a
more.
minute, hold on, Blake.
than-
Jen? Wait a minute, Jen, let me get you unmuted here. So you might have a technical problem that we need to address. Okay, go ahead, Jen.
I just want to, was it 4-1?
It was 4-1,
Okay,
and the motion passes.
got it. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, Blake?
My only point was we're not going to meet the intent of what we're trying to do with the way it's worded by saying one person or one owner, because there's just too many ways to get around it. So somehow elsewhere in this regulation, you're going to have to clarify that.
Yeah, we're going to have to define owner or person, whichever language we use. And then that's going to require John Casey to tell us what to say, because I don't know what to say. I'm good at straw men, but not the final version. Okay. The next one I had on my list was the parking issue. You good with that one to discuss that? Okay, let me explain it. My thinking on this has evolved quite a bit. I had a couple of exemptions in there earlier in the summer that I've kind of let go in favor of all this parking has to be off street. That's the first rule. I mean, just drive through Noank on a Saturday in the summer and envision a fire truck getting through some of these streets. It's impossible, even on the main streets. So my view is it's off street, whether it's a space per bedroom or first 2 bedrooms, all of that, I kind of don't care. But I do think all the parking needs to be off street, and with one exception. And the problem with the exception is what Lynn said earlier about non-conforming lots. We're going to have to find out what the date is. If I'm correct, and it's based on the date of enactment of the regulation of the activity you're regulating, then that means it's the current date somewhere now. If Lynn is correct that only non-conforming uses are the ones that predated any Noank ordinance on anything, then it's a whole different thing. My view with this exception on non-conforming lots is if there's a lot where people park off the street, but it's not on their property, and that's how the owner has worked out arrangements to be able to park his cars, we ought to allow that same opportunity for his renters. I can think of a couple of cases in Noank where that's happened. People have subdivided and never had a parking area, but they've figured out ways to park, but it's non-conforming. I'd say whatever the owner has, let the renter do the same, as long as it's off the street. So that's why that issue is there for highlighted for discussion. Is that clear to you so we can discuss it? I'm assuming everybody agrees with the first principle, which is the parking should be off the street. I've not heard anybody disagree with that. Blake?
I don't necessarily agree with it. I really don't care if it's on the street as long as they're not causing congestion, if they're not blocking traffic. Someone lives at the end of a cul-de-sac and there's very limited off-street parking. They're parked, on the street. It doesn't matter. The whole issue is the traffic congestion. And
It is,
like Pearl Street, where you can't get 2 lanes of cars.
How do you regulate that though if you don't say all or none? You're off the street or you're not. You have to look at each street and decide what's a legal parking spot and what isn't, and how wide is a fire.
2 cars can't get by, that's causing congestion.
But that means you have to enforce it after the violation is occurring, and the fire truck may have a different point of view on that.
Well, I mean,
I'm just,
I think you can tell if you're parking in a way that's, you're causing congestion and two cars can't get by you. Particularly these streets that don't have sidewalks. I mean, people are walking in the street and still you have cars stacked up and traffic coming that they have to go around the parked cars. That's really the issue.
it is, but it's not enforceable, I don't believe, if you just simply say, it's in the eye of the beholder. If you think a truck can get through, you're okay. I don't think that's the way to adopt a regulation. It has to have some kind of a standard to it. Beth.
Yes, the standard I had introduced earlier was, if you have parking on your property, then you park on your property. There are certain houses in Noank that don't. And if you don't, then you're limited to 2 cars on the street. That's it, no more. And it doesn't matter how many bedrooms you're renting out, you get 2 cars. Because quite frankly, the streets can't handle more than that.
I had, well, go ahead, others. Lynn?
Another way of doing it, someone in one of the letters had suggested we look at Portsmouth, Rhode Island, and they have some interesting definitions. And they say, so it has to be off-street on property. And they define a parking space as 10 feet wide by 20 feet long. And if there's not enough parking on the property, can use legal on-street parking adjacent to the property frontage, 20 feet for each car. So if it's a legal parking place right, adjacent to your front yard, then that would be all right. And I would add a third thing to what you're saying, Rick. If they also have something, let's say within 150 feet, the parking on someone else's property, and there's documentation that that's all right, that they would get parking, that parking as well, and whether you want to limit it to 1 space or 2 spaces, I don't know. But that gives 3 different options, and if you can't meet any of those, then it's probably really not a good idea.
I would only make an observation for the humor of the moment, that I was the advocate that started talking about, well, if you don't have a yard space, you can have 2 spaces on the street. And Lynn, you hammered me with really good logic of why that would be so hard to enforce, and you'd have to have dashboard stickers, and police would have to know who's got, or Noank would have to know who's allowed to have street parking and who's not. And I said, darn, she really makes a good point. So I withdrew my support for that and simply said, park off the street. Now, I'm okay with an argument that goes in the other direction, but half of my brain is saying, make sure anything we do is enforceable, easy to understand, everybody knows the rule, and it's enforceable. And it is very complicated to say, well, that property doesn't have enough parking off the street, so they get 2 spots. And it's the very argument you gave to me in the summer, and it was a good argument. It changed my mind.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm for simplicity also. So with what you're proposing right now, I could certainly go with that. And I was the one that was, again, was fighting against having on-street parking, particularly, well, if this is how many cars that they already have, and then it's like, well, that's, how do you know how many cars they really have? And, that, to me, that was a big can of worms. And yeah, and the easier it is to enforce, the better, because we don't have somebody out there to enforce it in real time. So that gets to be a big mess.
Blake, are you persuaded by any of this? I mean, I'm becoming dependent on your logic on a lot of these arguments. And this one, I don't agree, but I want to see if you're having a different viewpoint after you've heard the debate.
Well, I'm not sure how it's going to be enforced, really. I mean, or how any of these scenarios would be enforced differently. It's all going to be after the fact, like you said earlier. If someone's parked where they shouldn't be parked, then there's some kind of enforcement mechanism that happens, I guess. But
I would, as most of these things, I believe, are going to be, if a situation gets bad enough that neighbors are calling the zoning office to complain, and then we look into it and have a hearing about not performing properly, the risk is the operator loses his permit. That's what has been built in here as an enforcement mechanism. We aren't going to hire a traffic cop.
Right. So that's what I'm saying, that, back, what
That's why it's cleaner to say off the street. And if a neighbor sees short-term renters that are parking on the street, that's a violation. It's clean. Larry.
Well, I think the enforcement starts up front. If you can't demonstrate you've got off-street parking, you don't get a permit. So then it's really easy to do enforcement because we track whether or not there's a short-term rental in there, and then by definition, it's there. So the only one I think is the problem is people that don't have off-street parking today in their home, but they want to do short-term rental. So I think there's that little piece, still bothers me. I'm okay with off-street parking for everyone else to get a permit. But I don't know how to do that last one.
Tell me the last one again. I was mulling over.
The last one is, today, I own a home. There's no off-street parking. So by definition, I am parking on the street. If I then want to do short-term rental for that home, I'm stuck, right? So I think that, that is there a way of carving out an exception that says, if because it's a non-conforming lot or whatever the right language is already today, then maybe that's an exception condition. But other than that, I think they can't provide off-street. You shouldn't be doing short-term rental.
Well, that extra condition that you described is the way Lynn had discussed it, which is if you don't have off-street parking, but you want to do short-term rental, you get a couple of spots. It raises a question of how you administer that and know when there's a violation. Who knows whose cars are renters and whose aren't, and things. I hear you on that. And I generally, you can tell I'm sensitive to trying to let people do the day after the regulation is adopted the same thing they were doing before, if it's possible. With parking, I'm not sure it is. And that
Well, no. Remember, you have to demonstrate you have off-street parking to get the permit. Right?
Yeah. But you're saying it's extra condition, extra situation, and that's the people who don't have the off-street parking, but they would like to do short-term rentals.
Well, they still have to get a permit and identify they don't have off-street because they don't today. Can we build in an exception for, how many are there? First, so you got to look at the pragmatic aspect of that exception, right?
So in the permit application process, they tell you where they're going to have their people park.
Correct.
If they're parking on the street because the house has no yard parking, driveway parking, what do we do? Do we say the permit's denied, or we say, what's your alternative strategy for parking? And then we do it subjectively and we say, well, that one's okay, but this one's not. Is that an approach? It raises the hackles because it's not objective. Beth?
That's why in those situations you give them 2. That's it. The max is 2. If you've got a driveway, you're parking in the driveway. If you have no driveway, your max is 2. And then you could even, if you want to regulate it, then they could have like a little, like some little permit or patch or something that they put on their dashboard. So, those are there too. That's it. It doesn't have to say I'm a short-term renter. It can just be like a blue ticket. The blue ticket's there, that's there too, with the number of the house.
Yep, Larry, Don, I would say agree, Beth, because down in New Jersey where I've done some of these, you get a little sticker. You know, when you go in for the rental, they put it on your dashboard, and you park in there, you know, in a spot that allows those blue stickers. So yeah, there are ways of doing it.
Lynn?
Or Rick, what you had suggested, that they get off-street parking. It doesn't have to be on their property. It can be somewhere else.
Hmm. Let me see if I get the logic of this right so I can write something. In the permit application process, the owner will be asked, where are your renters going to park? If they say off the street in my yard, they're fine. If they say off the street, across the street, because I've made a deal with my across the street neighbor for them to park on his lawn or whatever, then they're okay because they're off the street. If there is no off-street option, then the owner gets 2 windshield dashboard passes that they give to their renters when they check in, and they get 2 spots on the street. Is that the logic of how this is developed? Any disagreement with that?
Are they allowed to park anywhere where they're causing congestion?
I'd say no, but that's the problem. One of the problems is they're on the street and they don't know where the right place is to park or not. Human beings are going to park as close as they can to the rental house, no matter what you tell them in the rules. And if a fire truck can't get by, I have a problem. So I would vote no. They're not going to be sensitive to, you know, the problems of our fire apparatus getting by. Beth?
They would still have to abide by the parking regulations. So if there's, you know, like if you're across the street from Universal, you're not allowed to park there because it says no parking. If it doesn't say no parking, then by default, you're allowed to park there and you get the 2 spots.
Hmm. Okay. Len?
I would ask why 2, why not just 1?
That'd be more conservative. Cuts the problem in half. Beth?
It does, but I mean, what if you're a whole family coming down and let's say you've got older kids, you know, in their 20s and 30s, they're meeting you there. I don't know. I just thought 2 was just enough, but not too much. I'm not wedded to it.
Yeah. You know, we're all rightly thinking on our feet, trying to figure out how people are going to do their workarounds and what we could do in response to that. I picture a place that doesn't have any any off-street parking. They get 1 pass, but they're going to have a party, and they invite 4 couples. Come to my house in Noank. You know, I rented it for the weekend. You got 3 people, 4 actually, parking on the street, 1 with a pass, and the other 3 are just, they came because they were invited. I can't think of a way. I put my public safety hat on when I thought about this issue most recently, and that's why I said, if you do short-term rental, got to be off the street. And I'm hearing this debate, the more I'm thinking that's my view of how we ought to go. And the latitude I wanted to give these people earlier this summer, I don't see how you can do that. But that's just my opinion, and it could be my vote, and maybe I'll be persuaded in the next comments. Beth?
In the scenario as you just described it, there are two things that would prevent it. One, those other three cars that come to this quote unquote party don't have the permit. And so they're technically in violation and they could be brought up and lose their license. Two, gets to the other part of our regulation as to whether we're even going to allow events or parties. If we don't allow events or parties and they have one, then again, they're in violation, putting their permit in jeopardy. I mean, the fact remains, I hear you, Rick. There are plenty of times when I cannot get to the bottom of my street because, and maybe not this summer, but in summers past, because cars are parked on both sides and they go to Abbott's. There's really no way to stop that. As you know, there's times when there's no way anyone could get down the street, not an ambulance, not a fire truck, not even a single car anymore because they're lined up. But unfortunately, we can't regulate to prevent every situation. I wish we could, but it's not feasible. I think we just have to do the best that we can. While still treating all of the property owners in Noank equally. So, but the way that you're proposing it, they're not being treated equally, because if I own a property and I don't have a driveway, then I'm not doing short-term rentals. Because let's face it, how many neighbors are going to say, go ahead, park on my property? That's asking a lot, and I don't necessarily think you're going to get it. Whereas another owner who has a driveway wouldn't be required to go begging his neighbor to park there.
Two issues here. Just one as an aside. One of the things I think we need on our priority list after we resolve short-term rentals is parking in Noank. Regardless of short-term rental or not, I think it's a significant enough zoning problem that that's something that we ought to address. And then everybody will be treated the same, because if it's a no parking area, it'll apply to everybody, and that's the public safety issue more than people's convenience. That'll be probably equally fraught with anxiety as the current issue is, but so be it. What would everybody like to do on this? The way I had described that was, in a permit application process, the owner will be asked, where are you going to have your renters park? And if they say on the street and they have no yard parking or driveway parking of their own, they would get 2 spots, or 1 spot was a variable there with a dashboard pass. Is that how you want to approach it? Is there a motion to that regard? Beth?
I make that motion.
Okay, so the applicant will be asked where they intend to have their renters park. If it's on the street and there's no off-street parking for that property, they will get 2 spots with a dashboard pass for renter parking. That's the motion. Is there a second? Is there a second? I see no second. Motion dies for lack of a second. I will offer a motion that all parking for short-term rentals will be off-street. Is there a second to that?
Second.
Okay, seconded by Lynn. Discussion on the motion. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, raise your hand. All those opposed? Okay, 3-2, the motion fails. Okay, So what's your pleasure on parking then? How should we address it? Lynn?
Let's try Beth's motion with one parking space.
Okay. That your motion, Beth? Or actually, it's Lynn's motion. She's
Yeah.
sitting, yeah. So applicant will be asked where the renters intend to park. If it's on street, they will get one spot. One pass. Okay, that's motion. Is there a second? Beth? Seconds? Okay, discussion on the motion. Blake?
So, not to be difficult, but what are we doing about let's say it's a hosted rental. What are we doing about the host's car, the owner's car? Is that counting against one of these spots? So maybe your driveway has 2 spots in it and you have 2 cars. An owner could have 3 or 4 cars. But we're just not that we need to define all these things too.
So the owner has 3 or 4 cars and they park on the street now because they don't have off-street parking. And they're renting a room in their house, so that's 1 more car and a
Or
pass.
perhaps they have on-street parking or off-street parking, or maybe it's not as much off-street parking as cars they have. I mean, there's a million scenarios.
In that case, I would tell the owner on application, you're going to have to find a way to take one of your 4 cars and take it elsewhere. Because if you want to do the privilege of doing short-term rentals, you got to let one of those spots in your yard be for the renter. I mean, really, this is starting to get to be one of those circular things that,
That's why we haven't solved it yet, Rick. We've been talking about this.
yeah, you're right. I mean, it's, that would be my solution to that condition. He has off-street parking. It's just maybe he has a boat in one of the spots. Maybe he's got
There's a lot of those cases in
his
Noank,
whole
right?
driveway is taken up by stuff he owns, and he also wants to do short-term rentals. And my view would be, sorry, move one of your things because your renter is going to be in one of those spots. That's just my view. I sound very militant.
And then the owner gets to park on the street. Is that what you're saying?
Well, perhaps he takes his boat and stores it somewhere else. I don't know. Just in that case, though, there is off-street parking. So that really is the owner's business to resolve, I would think. You do raise a good point. I mean, for every solution we think we're going to come to, somebody's going to find a workaround.
I like Beth's motion originally, the first one that didn't pass, as long as if you just add, they can have 2 spots on the street as long as they're not causing congestion or blocking traffic. I'm not really making that as a motion. I'm just part of my discussion. But I would second if someone else did.
Well, I'm willing, the motion that's on the floor, I think is the one with the 1 parking spot on the street, and I'm willing to amend that with the not blocking traffic clause.
Well, the clean thing to do, Lynn, would be to, since you're amending the motion anyway, well, Blake was on the prevailing side on the one that failed anyway, so it kind of doesn't matter. You got to pick up a vote somewhere. I mean, the clean thing would be to amend this motion on the fly to say 2 spots, and as long as they aren't causing congestion. How you enforce that, regulate that, I have no idea, because it's going to be very subjective. But
Let's first vote on the 1 spot, and if that gets voted down, then we can go back to this one.
okay. So the main motion without any amendment is, where will you park? On street, If it's on street, you get one spot with a dashboard pass for it. That's the motion made by Lynn, seconded by Beth. Further discussion? All those in favor, raise your hand. All those opposed, raise your hand. So it's 2 to 3. So the motion fails. Okay. Is there a new motion that captures the 2 pass again with the, as long as they aren't causing congestion? Dana? And Dana, hold on. Okay, here
There we
you are.
go. I found it. I don't know if this is a helpful suggestion or not, because my view is pretty cynical like Blake's. In short, how are you going to enforce any of this? And that's why we're having so much problem. So maybe in theory, can we think of some motion that would solve the parking problem that is the most enforceable, that is the simplest, and then go with that for now? Because in the end, I don't see any of this as being enforceable.
Well, let's see. I thought that simple one failed.
Yeah.
We get to change our mind on all this stuff later, right, Rick?
Well, everything we do by motion can be undone by a future motion.
Well, my point really
We're
is
satisfied, and then we don't
see
make.
this in its totality, and you see how the relationship between each of these
Oh
controls,
yeah, absolutely.
it's going to look different. So
Okay, we still have no past motion on parking. According to my notes. Beth?
Okay, so I'm going to make the motion that I made the first time, which is if you have no on-site parking, that you be allowed 2 spots as long as it doesn't cause any congestion in the street.
If no off-street parking, you get 2 spots
With a permit.
on street with dash tag, dash pass, as long as it does not prevent, instead of saying not cause congestion, which is real loose, could we say does not prevent passage of a fire vehicle? That's the biggest thing that'll want to get through. An ambulance and a car can definitely get through that hole. Is that better?
We could say emergency vehicles.
Passage of, well, except an ambulance getting through won't let a fire truck through.
well, Rick, I would suggest you could say congestion, and we can define that later,
Okay.
because we use it elsewhere in the STRs anyway.
Okay, does not, okay, so does not cause congestion. You happy with that, Beth?
Yes.
Okay, is there a second to that?
I think I better.
Yeah, better. You should have offered the motion. Okay, motion by Beth, second by Blake. In the application process, if the owner says there's no off-street parking, he will get 2 spots on the street with dashboard passes, as long as this does not cause congestion.
I would suggest that they're defining that in their application process as where those locations are.
Yeah, that's what I mean by in the application process. Earlier I had said, where will you park? And that's where will they park? Okay with that, Beth?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, motion made and seconded. Discussion on the motion. I don't see anybody dying to comment. All those in favor, raise your hand. All is opposed. Okay, 4-1, motion passes. All right, that's parking. I didn't get a clear signal on, no, I know, never mind. I gotta ask a question on that. All right. That was the list of things that I thought we would get to tonight, and it's about quarter of. One of you pick something you'd like to debate on this list and see if we can wrap a couple of these others. Lynn.
I would just if you would make a note for another time, but for the property parking, apparently some places have had trouble with a lot of cars parking in a yard. So we might want to say that they don't allow, parking in the yard because I guess one of the newspaper articles we got or something, it showed all these cars, like 6 cars parked in the yard. So
Is that something you think we really need to deal with it in a zoning ordinance? It's the owner's property. If he wants to trash his lawn with cars parking there, as long as they're off the street, I guess I would care.
probably, and if we have, again, it depends. If we have a no party rule, then that might take care of it. So,
Yeah.
So that's why I say just put it as a note for now and
Okay.
come back to it.
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting. The guy across the cove from me has a big party once a year, and he's got a big lawn,
Yeah.
cars all over the place. I can see him from a mile away. It has nothing to do with short-term renting. He just parks his party participants on his grass, and so yeah, we can hold that for a discussion later. So, what's the next issue you'd like to discuss? Who'd like to pick one? I will if you don't. Lynn?
No, we had started the noise one before. That's another one we didn't finish. And I thought with the last time that we looked at the matrix, and I thought we had a really good discussion on that.
Mhm.
And I thought it was good because, Blake, you had given some very good arguments for keeping it simple. And Rick, you had given good arguments for needing to be specific in terms of enforcement. So, and Rick, you had given us the instructions. Now you think about it right now, don't let it simmer. So I did. And so I thought that was very helpful. So I think we could maybe move into that quickly.
Okay. This is called unruly behavior on this form, but that's essentially the noise. So you can read how that reads right now. Do you like that language or do you like it changed? Lynn?
I liked Blake's terminology, which was no objectionable traffic congestion, noise, smoke, odor, or other unsuitable conditions any time of day or night. I thought that was a really good, inclusive statement. And then to that, the discussion would be, do you want to emphasize, add a little more emphasis to where the problems, the more typical problems would be expected. And if so, that would be, which I think is a good idea, to add to that, events and parties prohibited, and then quiet hours between. And the way you've got it written here, that no loud music or no any of this other between the hours of 10 and 9, but I remember Blake's saying so clearly, it's not only the hours between 10 and 9, you don't want that anytime. But if you're talking about something between at nighttime, it would be quiet hours.
Can you read that Blake's language again so Jen and I can both get it down for the minutes?
Okay, it is in the chart, but it is it's in the chart, on the comparison chart.
Okay. So Blake's language. Right
That.
there. So Blake's language on page 1 of Big Matrix.
Yeah.
Objectionable traffic congestion, noise, smoke, odor, or unsuitable conditions any time of day or night. Okay, that'd be part 1 of a motion. Number 2 would be the quiet hours as in that other. Actually, Larry, leave it right where you had it. Because the quiet hours here, there is a deviation. Some people wanted 10 p.m. to 9 a.m. Some people wanted 9 p.m. to 8 a.m. And we should keep track of that. So we'll have that language that he's highlighted as part of a motion, and then period. Then second would be quiet time. So what time of day do you like quiet time? And would it be no loud music, noise, or conversations? Is that sufficient?
No, just quiet hours. Because people think of some other way to make noise, but it's just quiet hours. Everybody understands you need to be especially quiet during quiet hours.
I would urge you to put in what you want to be prohibited, or people will always beat you because they'll say, well, what does quiet hours mean? You have, in a regulation, you have to have what it is you're going to prohibit, or everything is allowed. So if it's not just loud music, noise, or conversations,
But the problem with that is, and that gets back to what Blake was saying, if you say no music, no loud conversation, music, or noise between whatever the hours are, then that sounds as though you can have it at the other times.
not if you include both of these things. Objectionable noise is in the eye of the beholder, and that's your guidance. I got that language out of our existing zoning ordinance in other places. That's language I lifted out of the Blue Book. That's separate from the time of day restriction is for very specific things that you don't want any of that to occur when people are trying to sleep. I can buy the point. This is why I included both in this big matrix. I have no objection to that language that's bold-faced, but are highlighted.
Then maybe we don't need the quiet hours. Maybe that's.
No, I think you gotta have them, or at midnight when somebody's doing something and you're trying to depend on no objectionable noise anytime, they're gonna say, well, I didn't think I was being objectionable. And an officer or a homeowner who's in an appeal hearing in front of the commission is going to say, well, you didn't tell us what it was. They thought they weren't being objectionable. I don't care if my neighbors are cranky, but in a regulation sense, you gotta have something that says what it is you can't do during time A to time B. Why don't we use the language that's there for now? Using Blake's philosophy before, we're probably going to want to hone this a little more and maybe other things too. So use the language that's in unruly behavior and unruly behavior limits. Use both of those things and then just pick the time of day limits that we want on those limits. And if you want to adjust them later after you see how it reads in the minutes, then we can talk about that at a subsequent meeting. So a motion would be no objectionable traffic congestion, noise, smoke, odor, or other unsuitable conditions any time of day or night, period. And no loud music or conversation. No loud music, noise, or conversations between time A to time B. That one, no, go over to Lynn track A, Larry. I think it's very important, having had to deal with this over here. Conversations is really important. You can get people at 1 o'clock in the morning that are dropping foul language from a porch all over the place, and that makes your life in the neighborhood very unhappy. So I think loud music, noise, or conversations between X time to Y time is what I would opt for. Does anybody disagree with those three conditions on the time of day things? Loud music, noise, or conversations? I gotta move this back. Disagreement? I don't see any. Time of day. What's your pleasure on time of day? Lynn?
I've said it before, I think 10 is too late. This is going to be, when windows are open, children are going to school, people come and they rent a house for a whole week, and they can be outside and enjoying themselves and not be considerate of that. For people who do things early in the morning, like I like to row, and that's getting up very early, and if somebody's not quiet until 10, that's too late. And some people go to bed early. I know John goes to bed. He's certainly in bed by 9. And unless you want him going and knocking on doors and telling people to be quiet. That's
9 p.m. to 9 a.m. or 9 p.m. to 8 a.m.?
I don't have any strong feelings about the morning.
I don't think 8 or 9 in the morning matters. Even noisy people are asleep by then.
I would say if we're going to do in the morning, 9 o'clock.
Okay, so 9 p.m. to 9 a.m. Any disagreement with that? Seeing none. So that would be a motion, the language we had just talked about. Under Blake, unruly behavior general, and under unruly behavior limits, what Larry has highlighted there, except it would say 9 p.m. to 9 a.m. Any disagreement with that? Seeing none, I would say no need for a motion. Let's just, let's do that. I will move that. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Lynn. Discussion on the motion. Larry?
I would hope that under definitions, we can affix a decibel level to the definition of what loud is. And you could have two. You could have one during the day and one during the quiet hours.
Yeah.
It's the only way to be specific.
I know. And when I checked into that, you had to have a meter that was calibrated frequently, and somebody that was trained to run it, and that was a real problem unless you're a big city and had staff to do that. When I have had to
Well,
call policemen for short-term rental people that weren't behaving, the officer described Groton as having, you know, a community standard, which says by the time you get to a certain time of night, the loud music you have at 11 isn't acceptable where it might be at 9. And he spoke to the people doing the business, and they said, okay, we'll knock it off. So the police have a way of dealing with this where they don't have to run around with a meter in their hand. I take your point, but it creates the need for labor and equipment that has to be maintained and calibrated frequently. And I suspect that's not a place we really want to go to. If the police are willing to say, we have a time standard, 9 o'clock, and somebody's really creating a ruckus at 10:30, two things happen. Either the police get called and they say, knock it off, or we can take it to the commission as a hearing to say, it clearly was so loud that people were complaining, so we're going to have a hearing on this about pulling a permit. Does that make sense to you? Because I really wouldn't want to go with a decibel meter if we could help it.
all right. I mean, I just as a point of information, I have seen ordinances where they actually require the short-term rental owner to have a meter, but and then they're responsible for everything. I'm just saying that's out there.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
And oh, by the way, they're pretty cheap these days. You get it on your iWatch, has a decibel meter. But anyway, I'll withdraw. That was more of a point
The
of
calibration is the issue. Yeah.
Yeah. If it was easy to do and inexpensive, I would have no reluctance. That wasn't my understanding. And, you know, every time Apple comes out with a new watch, it does more. So maybe they've done that too. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, they have. That's fine for a future. I'm not.
Let's leave it for
saying
now.
that we should.
See.
Yeah,
'Cause
we shouldn't
we
change the motion. I'm just. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Any other discussion on the motion? Seeing none. All those in favor, raise your hand. Unanimity. I love it. Okay, that motion passes 2 minutes of 9. That gives us enough time to have a proper motion to adjourn, unless somebody has something else they'd like to talk about that needs to be discussed now, and I'm saying that sincerely. Anything?
I move to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn, second? I didn't see 5 hands. There you go. Okay. Motion's made and seconded. All those in favor, raise your hand. Thank you all once again. Made some real progress, 2 meetings in a row. Appreciate it.